And for 25 years, we have brought historic figures For 25 years, we have brought historic figures, legal luminaries, renowned authors, and teachers of all kinds to Jamestown, to Chautauqua County, and to your computer screens, really since COVID. We have hosted conversations on challenging topics, created informative exhibits on Jackson's life and his cases. We have augmented student learning on the Holocaust, civil rights, the legal system. We've inspired interns and fellows to pursue their dreams, and we've learned with and from all of you. In addition to our 25th anniversary, there's a couple of other big milestones this year. It's the 250th anniversary of our country. It is the 85th anniversary of Jackson being named to the Supreme Court, and as you'll learn a little bit more today, it's the 80th anniversary of the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg. Robert H. Jackson once described Nuremberg as the hardest thing he ever had to do. And I think that he and I would have a lot of good conversations about the law and about processes and about where all of this takes us, including in our nonprofit world. And especially how hard it is to grow and help a nonprofit thrive that is entirely dependent on philanthropy. So with a nod to NPR and PBS, if you enjoy our programming and value what we add to your conversations and to your lives, to your worldview and outlook, please consider supporting our work. In order to respond to current events, provide a safe space for discussion and debate, and to develop opportunities for students, educators, and all of us, our only limitations are our imaginations and our resources. Quick reminder, hopefully you all know this, immediately following the film, there will be a talk back with Jack L. High, the author of The Nazi and the Psychiatrist, which is the book that this film is based on. And we really hope that you will stick around for that. You'll have an opportunity to ask your questions. We'll also be doing the Chautauqua method of asking those questions. So if you have one and have not picked up an index card, those will be circulating after the movie as well. And I want to leave you, before Hillary comes out with her message, just with some words that Jackson delivered. This was at the University of Buffalo's Centennial Convocation in Buffalo, New York, on October 4th, 1946. This would have been 3 days after the verdicts were read at Nuremberg. But the Nuremberg trial has been a sincere and carefully planned effort by the nations to give to international law what Woodrow Wilson described as the kind of vitality it can only have if it is a real expression of our moral judgment. I shall not be surprised if a distant day will recognize this legal condemnation of oppressions and aggressions as civilization's chief salvage from the Second World War.
First, thank you all for coming out tonight to see the film. I first caught a glimmer of this story in 2002 when I was researching an earlier book called The Lobotomist. It's about another psychiatrist. And while I was going through that other psychiatrist's papers, unpublished autobiography, I read that this other psychiatrist had met Douglas Kelley in 1938 at a psychiatric conference. And the meeting really stood out in his mind because at this conference, Dr. Kelley was there not to present a paper or give a talk, but to give a magic show to this assembly of psychiatrists. I thought it was a very brave thing. Psychiatrists must be a tough audience for a magic show.
I can imagine.
And so that stuck in my mind. And eventually I got to looking up Dr. Kelley and finding out a little bit of his work in Nuremberg and what happened after. And that was the start of it.
Got it. Thank you. Okay. So you had mentioned that you had the privilege to have access to Douglas Kelley's family papers through his son. And in some recent interviews, you have discussed kind of the dual suicide manipulator dynamic. And I wondered if there were any emotional artifacts in what you had access to from Douglas Kelley that gave you some sense, perhaps, of the unraveling or the turmoil that he was going through.
Well, the artifacts that Kristen's referring to are these 15 banker's boxes full of materials that Dr. Kelley brought back from Nuremberg that were shown to me by Dr. Kelley's son, Doug. And I was the first person to see these outside of the Kelley family for about 65 years. And there's a great deal of emotional content in there because Dr. Kelley recorded his personal thoughts in some journals that he kept that were among those materials. There were physical artifacts like a framed 8x10 photo of Hermann Göring that Göring had signed to Kelley. That was like he was a movie, like it was Clark Gable signing a photo. And, but really the biggest emotional resource I had was the son, Doug, himself, because he lived through many of the important events in his father's life. He witnessed his father's suicide on New Year's Day in 1958. He lived through the kind of man that Dr. Kelley became in the late 1940s and through the 1950s. So Doug's perspective was extremely valuable to me. And I came to see, this is the kind of story where people have sometimes asked me, who's the hero here? It's hard to find one. Well, the hero is Doug, the son. And he makes no appearance at all in this film, but he's a very important figure in my book, and in my own mind, he is in some ways the primary figure and the bearer of the emotional content and import of the story.
That makes sense. Were there some research discoveries that you made that are in the book that didn't translate to the film? Anything of those that you'd like to share that stand out for you?
Sure. Well, the movie covers about 18 months of time, and my book covers about 45 years of time. There's a lot of interesting material I found interesting about the Rorschach test and how Dr. Kelley used it in Nuremberg. So it is shown briefly in the film, but Kelley was considered one of the leading American interpreters of the Rorschach test. Even though he was very young when his time in Nuremberg began, he was only 33. The Rorschach test is interesting because it's not used anymore in the way that Dr. Kelley and his colleagues used it. They used it as a diagnostic tool. So Kelley could give Hermann Göring a Rorschach test and determine he is a narcissist by the responses that Göring gave. And you would not see it used that way today. So that's part of it. And then a lot of interesting elements I found in Dr. Kelley's later years. So as the movie hints, Kelley concluded that these German defendants were not insane. They were not even monsters. They all, except for Robert Ley, who killed himself, they all fell within a normal range of human personality. And to Kelley, that was even more terrifying than it would have been if he had discovered that they suffered from some shared psychiatric disorder, because it meant that people like that are always among us. Mm-hmm. And I consider Dr. Kelley to be prophetic in this way. He convinced me. I went into my research and into writing The Nazi and the Psychiatrist, believing, as many of us do, that these men were exceptional in their monstrosity. And I don't believe that anymore. And it's a relief not to believe that, as I think Kelley eventually found, because only by taking them out of the monster category can we hold them responsible for the choices they made. Monsters will do what monsters do, but a human being makes a choice to behave in a certain way in most cases. So the later years of Dr. Kelley's life, I think, are really significant, and the conclusions that he came to, and also the recommendations he left for us as people who live in a democracy that can be under threat by authoritarians and people with despotic tendencies. So he did leave a plan, and all of that I find moving and persuasive.
You brought something up in your answer there that made me wonder if he had found his original conclusion, like if there was something psychologically different about the Nazi defendants, how do you think that would have changed Nuremberg, like from a moral perspective or a legal perspective?
It would have been interesting because if Kelley had found that some or all of the defendants suffered from what he initially thought he was looking for, what he called a Nazi virus, then how would we judge their actions? Kelley never reported his findings to the court. He did all of his investigating on the fly and in an unauthorized way. And he never really told much about it until he published his book in 1947. But of course, there are people who are truly psychiatrically ill and are not responsible for their actions. And we should not punish them for their actions if what they suffer from is a medical problem. I kind of shudder to contemplate what could have happened if the court ever came to see the defendants that way. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad they didn't.
You and I were talking a little bit earlier today, obviously, about your book and how it really does focus on that relationship between Dr. Kelley and Hermann Göring. And Jackson is not in the book at all. And
well, he is mentioned.
Yes, correct. Yes, he is. Yes, he's not Michael Shannon prominent in the book. Let's put it that way. Can you talk to us a little bit about how Jackson and the trial came to be such a big part of the movie as well?
Yeah, and this is a process. This process of a book becoming a movie is still mysterious to me. I don't know how it happened, really. But the way it evolved is that even before I published the book in 2013, I had published an article also called The Nazi and the Psychiatrist. And this article attracted the interest of James Vanderbilt, Nuremberg's director and screenwriter, who immediately saw cinematic potential in it, and his production company optioned it. And this was in 2011. So over many years, when it seemed to me that nothing is happening with this, James would periodically send me a new draft of the screenplay. So I saw 4 overall over the years, and they kept getting better. That was a good sign. I would comment on them, and I had to decide, what is my role here commenting? Who am I to be commenting on this? I did not, I believed and still believe that movies are different from books. What makes a good movie is different from what makes a book that people want to read. So I didn't want to approach reading these screenplays as a member of the history police to correct errors. That was a distasteful idea to me. What I thought I could contribute to the screenplays, since James Vanderbilt is a fantastic screenwriter, he's responsible for the movie Zodiac, which dates back to 2006, 2007, which is a wonderful movie. I urge you all to see it if you haven't. What I wanted to do was to be a person who could comment on how well does it look like this is working as a movie. So one of the things James did was introduce another storyline to supplement the Kelley Göring story. And James was very interested in Robert Jackson, and he thought that Jackson's progress through the trial and what happened to him in the course of the trial, at first advocating for it to happen and then prosecuting in it, would be a compelling new storyline. And I agree, it is. But it did lead to certain uncomfortable moments in the movie historically. For instance, in all these final scenes with Jackson and Göring, we see Douglas Kelley present in the courtroom, and actually by that time he was long gone from Nuremberg. Dr. Kelley had left in January 1946, and these encounters in the courtroom happened some months later. So when I first read and then saw the scene of Justice Jackson with the Pope, I was flabbergasted. That certainly wasn't in my book. It helps the movie along, but I don't think it actually happened.
It did not, no. It did not. In fact, he had already convinced Truman that a trial was the way to go. So that sort of angst there and needing to call in a literal higher power was not necessary. But what do you think, from a cinematic perspective, we gain from seeing Douglas Kelley in the courtroom and getting that emotional reaction?
It puts, I think, the Jackson storyline is a compare and contrast with the Kelley Göring storyline, and it puts it in a context. They each put each other into a context that I think strengthens each of the storylines. So that's one of the ways that movies are different from books. I think had I tried to add the Jackson part of the story into my book, I don't think it would have worked. I don't think it would have fit, because my book was motivated by 2 main questions, which were, one, what did Dr. Kelley actually learn from his time with the German defendants? And two, what was the connection between their two suicides, the actual connection? As you saw in the text on the screen, they both used the same method, cyanide poisoning, as taking their lives. So what did that mean, and why did it happen that way? And adding material about Justice Jackson, as compelling as all of that is and worthy of exploration, didn't fit into my book.
I mean, we have a whole center for it, so yeah, I get that. Yep. So this book is something you have worked on, you've done deep research into it, you have seen 4 drafts of a film come across your desk. Were there certain complexities in the book that you worried would not translate to the screen, and what mattered about those complexities?
One complexity that I don't think has translated to the screen has to do with the interactions between Dr. Kelley and Dr. Gilbert. Dr. Gilbert was not a psychiatrist. He was a PhD psychologist from an academic background, and Kelley came from a medical background. And they did not get along at all, although they did not get into any fights in the hallway. But they looked at these defendants fundamentally differently, and using the same kinds of tests and evaluations that Kelley used, Gilbert came to some different conclusions about the defendants. He believed that some of them did suffer from serious psychoses that could explain their behaviors. And to me, there's nuance needed in discussing the differences between the thinking of these two men. And I don't think, that cannot come across in a movie. Then there's another matter, 2 matters really. So I mentioned Dr. Kelley's son, Doug, earlier. I consider him a friend now. I talk to him often, all these years after I wrote the book. And when I first saw the movie at the Toronto International Film Festival last September, I called Doug the next day and told him that before he sees the movie, there's a couple of things I have to warn him about. One was Doug's mother doesn't exist in the film. So the film gives the impression that Dr. Kelley came to Nuremberg and he was apparently a bachelor, or there's no reference made to him being married or having a family of any kind, but that's not the case. He was married before he entered the U.S. Army, and that is a big part of the story. And then the second thing I had to warn Doug about is that the movie gives the impression that Dr. Kelley was drummed out of Nuremberg because of the information that he revealed to a reporter. And that's not the case at all. He did reveal information to a reporter that made a front page headlines, like the one we saw in the film, but he got a scolding for it, but he remained in Nuremberg for a while afterwards. It was his decision to leave, and he was honorably discharged, and in fact got a promotion in rank just before he left the service. So those are a few of the things.
No, that makes sense. I think one of the things I think you did very well in your book is you invite the audience to examine Göring, but not excuse him. And I wondered if having it as a different medium, does that change potentially the empathy that an audience might feel for a character? Does it maybe make the Göring character a little more sympathetic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a tough thing. I've received some criticism for the Nazi and the Psychiatrist, and also for my earlier book, The Lobotomist, for what people have called humanizing certain characters. And I do that because they're human. I don't believe in monsters. And part of my motivation to write is to find the human motivations that make people do monstrous things. But there's always a motivation. And that was part of my pursuit in the Nazi and the Psychiatrist. I don't, watching the film, this is the fourth time I've seen it, I don't think Göring comes off in a sympathetic way, and I certainly hope he doesn't in my book either. But it's a delicate balance in writing a book, because I don't like to be the kind of writer who tells readers what to think, who makes an argument in a book. I'm not even a historian in the sense that I don't, my interest is not in analysis or in movements and big things going on in eras and things like that. I'm a storyteller who uses factual material and factual characters. So I am shaping the story just by virtue of what I choose to include in it. There's so much that has to be cut out. But my inclination is always to let the reader decide. It's more powerful that way, and I don't want to overwhelm the reader with my conclusions.
I understand that. One of the comments you made, as well as the parallels between Kelley's and Göring's end with suicide, does that give us any insight into perhaps the psychological cost of prolonged exposure to perpetrators such as that? Or am I making too clear of a distinction, drawing too clear of a line from point A to point B?
It sounds like you might be saying that Kelley took his own life because he was damaged somehow from the time he spent in Nuremberg. And the damage that he suffered had to do with turning his professional life upside down. That he learned that psychiatry could not explain these men, could not explain their behaviors. And that was deeply unsettling to him. And so over the rest of his life, he gradually turned to another discipline. He ended his life, when he ended his life, he was a professor of criminology at University of California, not a professor of psychiatry. So he had gone in that more social science kind of direction. So aside from that professional upending that Kelley went through from his time in Nuremberg, I think that was just one of many insults he suffered in his last 14 years of his life. Others had to do with health problems. He was an alcoholic. He had problems in his marriage. He perceived that he was being persecuted by the U.S. government as part of the anti-communist McCarthy era. He was not a communist, but he believed that the government perceived his ideas and warnings that way. And all of that came together to make him a very seriously depressed person, and also a difficult father to be with, as I learned from Doug. So it's complicated. Often
Often is, yes. All right, so the book came out in 2013. the film in late 2025. That's a pretty big difference time span wise in terms of how public perception might play into the experience with this film. So has the public conversation shifted in the time since you wrote the book to the film's premiere?
A great deal. It has, not just public perception, my own perception. When, back in 2013, when the book came out, my thoughts were, okay, I'm writing about Nazis, and I considered far-right extremists to be on the periphery then of our contemporary politics. After all, 2013, this is the middle of the second Obama administration. Now, it doesn't feel that way anymore. Far-right extremists are at the center of our political discourse and are influencing it in much stronger ways than before. And so that makes me think a lot more when I talk about the book, about the contemporary resonance of the story. And it makes me emphasize in my own mind Kelley's conclusions and his recommendations for democratic societies on how to resist authoritarianism.
I'm going to remind you all, if you have questions, raise your hand if you don't already have an index card, and there will be people walking around to give you some index cards. So let us know, and we'll happily address the questions that you all have as well. But just to carry on in that vein a little bit more, because some of what Kelley had recommended potentially were cognitive fitness tests for political candidates. He also warned about segregationists, Southern segregationists. Again, late, into the 50s, this is sort of a different era that we're talking about. Do you see any irony in some of what Kelley was warning about in today's?
Well, the parts of his plan to protect America that I latch on to, he did recommend, as you said, that any candidate for a political office should be forced to undergo a mandatory psychiatric examination. And while that might benefit us in some cases, I see a lot of problems with that too. Who examines? Who interprets the results of the examination? That's one part of Kelley's plan that I would not give my full-throated support to, but others I would. An important thing that Kelley emphasized is that we need to fine-tune our educational systems to emphasize critical thinking instead of emotional response, because Kelley knew from these men he interviewed in their prison cells that propagandists depend upon uncritical emotional responses to propaganda. So that's one part I like, and then the other part I like is Kelley's emphasis on making voting easier, not harder for qualified voters. And and this came out of Kelley's, what Kelley was seeing in the late 1940s, 50s in the South. And he believed that the segregationist, white supremacist politicians who held sway there were restricting the vote, that's a fact, and that they were manipulating their constituents. in an opportunist play for power, just as the Nazis had done.
I think both Jackson, it sounds like, both Jackson and Kelley left Nuremberg with maybe some altered thinking. Jackson left Nuremberg being very concerned really about the amount of authority we invest in any one leader. Thank you. And also some of the fragility of international humanitarian law, since this was really the base of it. And Kelley, as you have said, is sort of left with that ordinariness of evil, or the ordinariness of anybody could have become this. And I wondered, what lessons can we take from those thinkings 80 years on now at this point that might help us navigate challenges today?
Well, to Justice Jackson's point, we saw in this film the degree to which he powered through and championed the use of an international tribunal to address war crimes, crimes against humanity, crimes against peace. And could that happen today? I don't think so. And I'm no expert on Justice Jackson, but I can only think he'd be disappointed in the position that our country occupies today regarding internationally judiciated crime. That we do not participate in the International Criminal Court. We sanction judges in that court who reach decisions that are against an administration's policies. And I think that's a tragedy that the U.S. has given up that position as a leader, a spearhead of international justice. Kelley didn't write much about that at all. And I think were he around today, he would still be saying many of the same things about authoritarianism, what to do about it, that ending World War II, all the 13 Nuremberg trials, none of that was going to end these kinds of problems, genocides, etc. We still have them. And I think if he were alive now at the age of 114, that he, no matter how old he was, he would be speaking out against it.
Okay. One of our audience questions was, could you share a little bit more about the relationship between Kelley and the Göring family?
Yes. The question that Göring keeps asking in the film, are we friends? I think Kelley never regarded them as friends, even pretending to Göring. That the relationship that they had and the affinity they had was based on a recognition of many qualities that they shared. They were both very intelligent. They both thought very highly of themselves. And they were both charming in their way. And they were both master manipulators. And they both recognized that in each other and allowed the other to manipulate him. So, because it served purposes for each of them. But Kelley never lost sight of the dark aspects of Göring's, dark and dangerous aspects of Göring's personality, that despite how charming he was and all the jokes he told, that he lacked remorse, he lacked a conscience, he was vicious in his dealings with anyone outside of his own family, and that he was responsible for millions of deaths. And that's something that Göring would never own up to. But so this is not the basis of a friendship. And there was some admiration and affinity, but no friendship.
So a question from the audience as well. So if Kelley concluded that Göring was normal and not a monster, how did that lead him to determining that psychiatric evaluations would be beneficial in leadership?
Well, how did Kelley determine that these men were normal? Through psychiatric evaluations. And psychiatric evaluations are valuable not only to diagnose somebody with an illness, but also to gain insight into their character and motivations. And I think that's what he was leading up to.
No, that makes sense. Did you get a chance to visit the film set and as they were, and anything you want to share from that experience?
I did, yeah, that was wonderful. In the spring of 2024, while the shooting was going on, it was shot entirely in Hungary, not at all in Nuremberg. James Vanderbilt very kindly invited me to come and spend a week there to watch and meet people and engage. And I have to say, that was the best work trip of my life. That was a lot of fun. And by the time I got there, they had already done all of the exterior shooting. So all the rest of the scenes, and all the scenes I saw, were those being shot in this gigantic soundstage on built sets. So those built sets included the incredible set built for the courtroom, which was fully sized.
It looked very authentic to the actual courtroom.
And James Vanderbilt has told me that it was correct, down to the quarter inch. And then the jail cells, the prison, 2 floors of the prison. And then for some reason, the scene I saw shot that affected me the most was one you might remember from the movie, although I think it's not memorable to most people, but inside the military transport plane that's taking the defendants from Luxembourg to Nuremberg, where they look out the window and see how bombed out Nuremberg is. And this affected me because I'd written about that scene in the book, and it just looked exactly how I had imagined it. Now, there's not a lot of variation in how the inside of a transport plane can look, I guess, but it just put me right there into my book. And that was an unearthly and magical feeling.
Okay. I'm going to take one of these questions because one of them was, were Jackson's words authentic to the history of the trials? And I will be a little bit of the history police here. His opening statement starts exactly as his opening statement does. The parts that Michael Shannon said during that were all parts of his opening statement. His opening statement was 3.5 hours long, so we would still be here. So yes, but no. So they certainly picked some of the parts to help advance the story and give you a sense of where that was likely to go. But yes, for the most part, Jackson is a fabulous writer, and oftentimes other writers use his words for that. Okay. I think this is probably going to be our last question. Give me 1 second to decipher the handwriting. Did his proper knowledge lose respect purely for the reason, so wondering about, was his later career challenging for him because of what he was speaking about, the reception of his audiences to that type of rhetoric? As we saw the radio personality at the end saying, you're bashing the United States, you're not going to get very far with this.
Yes, that was part of it. His book flopped, and Gilbert's book did much better. And it's because Gilbert's message was more comforting to people, that many of these men were psychiatrically ill, and that accounts for their behavior. After this long, bloody, deadly war that killed so many millions of people, no one wanted to hear that we're going to face it again. And the public reacted badly to that message.
I'd like to give you the final word on this. What do you want people to take away from your book?
You know, I don't think about that very much. I want people to be emotionally moved and carried away by this story. I know there are lessons in this story. We've talked about some of them. But I just want, speaking about the book only, not the movie, I would like readers of the book to think more about everything that's happened. I don't have a prescribed message that I'm delivering. I want them to feel like it's been an engaging ride, and I'm going to think about this for a while.
I think that's a great note to end on. Would you please thank Jack?
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And of course, if you'd like to learn more about Robert H. Jackson, you know where we are. 305 East 4th Street. I look forward to seeing you all.